Good morning, subscribers. Is my hair okay here? Anyway, apologies for the rather shoddy appearance this morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is the half-term holiday, but I did just want to come in and put out this video on A592, that's the GCSE Economics paper, for those of you who will be taking that imminently. And so what I'm going to do in this very short video is to just put out my predictions for what the likely topic areas might be, and bear in mind this is a might be scenario because of course this is not an exact science. So I have here two things which I will put a little link in the description below to two things. Number one is my video from last year, the June 2016 A592 predictions. Do have a look at that. I have simply taken a little screenshot of the things which I said may or may not appear in that paper. And then I also have here a copy of the Unit 2 specification printed off the OCR specification. And all I've done is then I've gone through these two papers and I've gone through the June 2016 paper and I've ticked off everything that was assessed within those three papers. And now we can maybe have a little look at assessing what the likely topic areas might be for your exam. Now, of course, as I keep saying on these videos, this is not an exact science, so don't just learn these things, focus on everything, but maybe these might be areas which are more likely than others to be assessed. We shall see, time will tell. Okay, so first, ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking at section 2.2.1, which is entitled, What are the Economic Objectives of a Government? And within this little section, I think we should be looking and focusing maybe on the following aspects. So it talks about, for example, balancing exports and imports. Now, in the previous three sessions exam papers, there has been very little, I think there's been one question actually, asking about the relationship, the trade balance, that relationship between exports and imports. So maybe that's something to just brush up on and focus on, although the depth with which you need to actually know that in this section of the specification is quite limited anyway. More detail required for section and unit 3 as you know. Measuring growth. So there's been a lot on the previous exam papers on economic growth, how fiscal policy can be used to stimulate economic growth, that type of question. However, what hasn't been asked before is simply asking you, well, how is economic growth actually measured? How do we measure GDP? So there's something to consider, and you'll, I'm sure, be aware that there are three ways of measuring GDP. One of them called the income method, one of them called the output method, and one of them called the expenditure method. If you're not familiar with those terms and how it's used, look on the video which I've just done for my GCSE class quite recently about economic growth, and I go into that in a little bit more detail on that specific video. The whole notion of the distinction between GDP and GDP per capita, that's not really been assessed lately either, so that's maybe something that you may wish to consider. And I think any part D on this question, obviously there are only two real possibilities for a question on part D. One question will either be on economic growth, or one question will be on unemployment. Those really are the only two possible questions, given the content here of the specification. Those are the only two possible topic areas for the extended answer, part D, on the first question on the paper 3. So make sure you're familiar with economic growth and you're familiar with unemployment. So I'm looking here, evaluate policies that a government can use to reduce unemployment. So make sure that you know how monetary, fiscal, supply side policy can be used to reduce the level of unemployment, but also be aware of the various pitfalls associated with such policies. And the same for economic growth. What policies can the government use, but what problems might be encountered, so that you're considering your discussion-based answer on the one hand, on the other hand. Okay, section 2 then, moving on. 2.2.3. I'm going to the last section here first actually. 2.2.3. Which policies can the UK government use? Okay, so this section focuses particularly on the following areas. fiscal policy, monetary policy and supply side policies. Now if you look back historically in the last 3 sessions, monetary policy has been assessed quite a lot, as is fiscal policy. Supply side policy only once. So maybe a little bit more focus on your revision in terms of supply side policy might be useful. And the other thing is on this section, it talks about understand how a government can achieve a balanced budget, a budget surplus, a budget deficit. Make sure that you are familiar with those terms. What is a balanced budget? G equals T. What is a budget surplus? T greater than G. What is a budget deficit? G greater than T. So make sure that you're au fait with all of these terms. Likely essay extended answer questions. So we've got 3 possibilities here. Evaluate the effects of fiscal policy on the economy. It's been done quite a lot lately, so maybe not so prominent maybe this time. Evaluate the effects of interest rate policy, so monetary policy, on the economy. Been done before. And then finally, understand that measures to achieve one policy objective might have adverse effect on other policy objectives. And then that's not really an essay question, but the essay question, evaluate policies that a government can use to control inflation and achieve price stability. So that's 1. Evaluate the consequences of inflation, including the cost of inflation and the benefits of price stability, or the benefits of a low rate of inflation. Now, one of the things, and certainly looking at the AS papers which have just gone previously, when we're talking about inflation, now inflation causes and consequences, make sure that you know those. So make sure that you know demand pull, cost push, monetary inflation. Make sure that you're familiar with the consequences of inflation. But again, that's a very sort of standard question. So be prepared for maybe a flip side, and this appeared on the AS paper. So it did actually throw a few students. Make sure that you could say, for example, discuss what the pros and cons would be of having a low rate of inflation. So let's say our target, as you know, is 2%. Well, what if we had a permanently low rate of, say, 1%? Who would be the winners and losers in such a scenario? Be prepared for something like that. Because the board, given that this is this the last time of assessment? I think so. They're running out of questions to ask here. So be prepared for that little curved ball, as it were. And then lastly, we're going in the middle section here now, 2.2.2. How does the UK government raise and spend its money? So this is all about obviously government spending and tax revenue. Again, indirect taxes have been asked quite frequently, so indirect taxes on goods and services such as VAT. But direct taxes, taxes on income, taxes on wealth not being so frequently assessed, so consider that. Make sure that you're familiar with the difference between between income and wealth. So income being a flow, whereas wealth being a stock. And make sure that you're aware of how direct taxes can be used to redistribute income. So that whole notion of progressive taxes, take from the rich, give to the poor, that Robin Hood scenario with regard to taxation. And then by way of an essay question on this one, I think you need to be maybe thinking about, if you think about policy lately and policies 5, 6, 7 years ago, think about the fact that this whole notion of maybe bringing back to policy a high rate of tax, a higher rate of tax, maybe a 50%, a 55% rate of tax for those high income earners. So consider what the likely pros and cons might be if the government were to reintroduce such a policy. I think that's something maybe worth considering. But again, this is just my best guesstimate. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for A592. A593, I've got my complete playlist for that, so do make sure that you have a look at that in anticipation of the paper. And as ever, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you the very best of luck for the very imminent now exams. Bye for now.